Good day, everyone. This is Miles Hischier. I am your host of the Hire with Miles podcast, where we talk to company leaders and founders who have big growth and hiring plans for 2025. And I look forward to our conversation today with Francis from MadKudu. Francis, how are you this morning?
Yeah, pretty good. Thanks for having me. Excited for the conversation.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for making the time. So, just as we start here, can you tell me about your journey leading up to MadKudu?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm one of those immigrants in the U.S. So, born and raised in France. Went through college and was fortunate enough to go to Stanford for a year in the U.S. Fell in love with the Bay Area and the Silicon Valley, and I've been here since. I'm a builder at heart, and I think I've been my entire life. I think there are kind of two turning points in my career. One of them was the first time I built an AI in college to play a board game that actually beat me consistently, and I realized,
Hmm.
okay, like this is cool that you can use a computer to build something that's better than you. And the second time was when I joined my first startup called Agile One, and I discovered enterprise sales. Um, and that was I fell in love with the space because there's something that I really appreciate in enterprise sales, the mix between the art of selling and the science of being able to use the data, doing analysis to make the deal go through. And yeah, that's kind of what then led me to build MadKudu, and it's been a fun journey so far.
Got it. I got it. So coming out of Stanford, did you study computer science and you had a more technical background for the first
I
portion of your career?
I studied initially fundamental mathematics and then applied math. So it was more on that side of the field, and then went into operations research, which is again like applied math, but not really computer science. So computer science was kind of a thing on the side for me.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And then further on, when you started working with larger enterprises, you mentioned interest in the enterprise sales process. Were you working as like a customer facing like engineering role or actually also like like a pre-sale capacity?
So I was actually running the technical sales teams, both pre-sale and post-sale. So sales engineers, implementation teams on both sides. So it was really interesting to be pulled in on the like pre-sale side and see how enterprise sales actually works, how long the cycles can be, how many stakeholders you need to manage, and what kind of levels of questions you get, and also how to answer the questions. It's almost like learning to read the question behind the question so that you don't just answer with like technical facts to a question, but really try to understand what the customer is looking to de-risk or trying to understand, and maximize and yeah respond in order to maximize that learning for them rather than just give them a straight up answer.
Got it. Got it. Great. Great. And then so tell me about MadKudu and the founding team. Yeah.
Yeah, so my co-founder and I are both from France. We worked together at this startup I was mentioning, Agile One,
Okay.
and we came up with the realization that we were a data company. So or the product we were selling was data science, but we had very little data science for our own go-to-market motion. So we realized that smaller companies don't have the means to hire a data scientist to go sift through all the data that they have about their customers, about their prospects, in order to align their resources with opportunity. And so that's kind of what led us to create MadKudu, with the understanding that we need to democratize data science for revenue teams.
Great, great. And I know one of the value propositions you guys lead with is score your buyers with explainable AI. And I've seen other like lead scoring systems in the past. And I think sometimes, although they intend to provide a lot of clarity, they can sort of create more confusion with like the language they're using. And then you have to like look at a set of definitions to understand what that means. So tell me more about like that sentence, like score your buyers with explainable AI and what you guys
Yeah,
are seeking to achieve.
I think it's an interesting space, and it's one of those where I think there's a shock of cultures, right? So the same way that being European founders in the U.S., there are ways we talk, there are ways we do things. Like typically, one of the comments we've had multiple times from VCs is that we don't oversell ourselves. Like you listen to some of the fresh grads in the U.S. and they're telling you that they're aerospace engineers that have sent rockets into space, but literally what they've done is put like Mentos in a Coke bottle and it just like flies up. And so they're trying to figure out how to adapt your language to the audience is really critical. And I think what's tricky with lead scoring is that you're at the frontier of sales and marketing who typically think about the same concept, a prospect, in very different lingo, in very
Right.
different ways. And so very often the tools that either do scoring or do any kind of sales intelligence are either built for sales or marketing. And so they'll use the terminology, they'll use like the context of that team, and it almost automatically gets rejected by the other. And that's in part because even from like if I'll take the example of AI, when you're in marketing, typically the marketers like to think of AI in a statistical way and as a police, right? It's like the AI is going to make the right decision and it should tell sales what to do. But when you're a seller, you're actually looking more for a co-pilot. You're looking for something that's going to give you an edge, a superpower to make your skills as a seller even better. And so this idea that you're going to have an AI tell you exactly what to do is something you're quite against because you feel it's like it's almost like telling you your skills don't matter. And so like figuring out what how to design the interface with the product based on who's going to be using it is really critical. And that's one of the big learnings that we had where when you're building explainability in scoring or any kind of sales intelligence tool, you need to adapt to the audience. So have a type of lingo and a type of interface when you're showing it to marketing where you want more statistics, more aggregated data. But then when you're explaining it to sales, it has to be actionable and directly relate to something they can do with it.
Got it. Understood. Understood. It almost could seem like two separate like products in a way, but it sounds like you guys have been able to unify that into one solution, which
Yeah.
is fantastic. And having been a sales pro myself, I totally understand your point around that mindset for sales. I used to call it finding diamonds in the rough. Like as a
Mm-hmm.
Google partner, we would, work with Google sales teams, and then we'd have leads that were automatically scored through some Google internal magic, but we would always find a lot of comedy in finding like an enterprise lead that was like marked SMB and disqualified. But and then you call and someone's like, "Hey, no one's called me back. I'm like just trying to buy services,"
Yeah.
and we loved that. We always called it diamond in the rough. And I know salespeople really enjoy that process of finding those. So,
Yeah, and it's super interesting to see, even from a marketing perspective, how some of these companies position themselves, right? So, Sixth Sense is one of the big players on the marketing side. I find it super interesting that they call themselves Sixth Sense. And on the flip side, from like the sales side, it's more Zoom Info, which is like zooming on the info, right? That like it feels like it speaks like a sales lingo, whereas Sixth Sense, like it kind of feels, oh, there is a sixth sense, like there's some kind of magical thing out there that could tell you someone is ready to buy. That's the kind of stuff that marketers are going to love and sellers are going to hate. Sellers want something tangible, like tell me this person is in market and like give me an actual sign that I can believe. Like help me zoom onto the info that is relevant to my sales cycle. So it's also super interesting to see how, yeah, like then based on which camp you start on, then it has like many implications, and it's very difficult to go beyond that.
yeah, great, great. Yeah, so tell me how large of the team is, or do you have today, and what are your like hiring and growth plans look like for maybe like the first half of 2025, if not the full year?
Yeah, so we're in the 50 range employees, and we're split. We have our core engineering team is in Paris. Um, then the go-to-market team is in the U.S. We have contractors in South America, and I think that's actually a core strategy of MadKudu. Like because we are foreigners, we know that one of our competitive edges is that we have, I guess, like a keen eye for talent that isn't as obvious in the U.S. Like we're not necessarily looking to hire, only Ivy League people. Like we can find Ivy Leagues from Mexico or Ivy Leagues from Europe, and that has
Yeah,
given us access to incredible talent that we would never be able to find in the U.S. because we would be competing with, the Metas, the Googles that pay more, have more brand recognition, and so essentially it gives us a competitive edge. And then in terms of hiring plans, I think right now hiring plans are like almost everything I feel in companies are hard to forecast. Like we have open recs today, but it's really difficult to predict how much is going to be open in 6 months or even in 3 months, given the pace at which things are evolving. Like the amount of automation that we've been able to build today is already incredible. So if we kind of follow a bit of a Moore's law, I expect that we're going to be able to automate a ton more. And so right now we are hiring more engineers, but I do foresee, similarly to what Benioff was saying at Salesforce, that we will be potentially no longer hiring in engineering, but hiring more on the go to market side.
Hmm. Fascinating, fascinating. And then as you think about like your go to market and your like ideal like target customers, I know like looking through your website, you have some like quite large enterprises that are using your solution, as well as like smaller like mid-market companies. Where do you see like your like how do you want to grow over time? I know you had an interest in enterprise sales and find that process very intellectually interesting. Is that something you want to lean into more, kind of going after that enterprise segment, or staying more and building more scalable solutions for like a mid-market type client?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, and there's, I guess, two parts to the answer. I mean, one, yes, we want to go closer to the enterprise, at least mid market up. I think there's more stability there, especially these days. Um, and I think what we're seeing is that we're we're, we're in a big market correction from the COVID era. At the time, I remember when I was doing podcasts and things like this, that one of the big terms that we were using was like the consumerization of B2B. B2B software was starting to get bought like consumer products, right? Individual people would buy licenses, and then more people would buy licenses. And at some point, the CIO had to sign an enterprise contract because there's so many people at the company using the tool that it made sense to do that. There's been a really big correction on the market, and now we're in more of a consolidation era where we're back to the enterprise days where deal cycles are fairly long. They require the CFO to sign in, and essentially the buying dynamic has changed from this kind of FOMO state where people bought because they had this fear of missing out to what I call a FOFU. It's a fear of fucking up,
Yeah.
where really the people will not buy because they're worried of the negative implications of making the deal rather than they are worried about the implications of not doing anything. So like essentially not doing anything is a lot safer than doing something. And we're seeing this with like the deal desks are much larger than they used to be. And so I think that's where like enterprise sales is becoming more and more prevalent, even in the mid market. Like it feels like enterprise sales, and I think the scalable and kind of like consumer style B2B purchases are not something in vogue today, and I think it's probably going to be there to stay because there's so many tools coming out with AI. It's so easy to churn software that buyers are probably going to be worried about making a small purchase decision and are going to be challenged as to why they're not, consolidating into a bigger platform. I think, yeah, there's like a big consolidation era that's coming, and that's going to hurt a lot of the smaller point solutions.
Yeah. Do do you think that era of FOFU and like that you mentioned and like the COVID era, do you think a bit of that could be rooted in like VCs and CEOs being more focused on a world of profitability versus just top line growth? And so it's sort of like, hey, before it was, I want to make sure I buy all this software and hit like take as many swings as I can to grow top line revenue. And now it's more about let's be more methodical and careful and pay attention to profit and maybe not buy stuff that's really expensive where we don't have a clear plan yet.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we are at a time of existential crisis for companies. The world is changing incredibly fast. I mean, it's topical that we're talking about this, so depending on when people are watching this, but yesterday, the Nasdaq lost $1 trillion in market cap as a reaction to the new AI model that was released by DeepSeek. I mean, that's massive amounts. And it just, I think, goes to speak of how fickle market caps are. And this is like the public market, but it has like strong implications on private markets. And I think it goes back to the internal Google memo that was leaked, that we have no moat, that's kind of like sparked and then sent shockwaves down like the VC markets, where it was basically saying that even if, foundational AI model builders like Google, OpenAI had no moat, how could any company have a moat? Like, it didn't feel like there was anything more technical than that. And like, even those people were saying we don't have a moat. So I think it's bringing up a lot of questions, and I think leaders are coming to the realization that they can't do business as usual. They need to spend time thinking about what is their moat, what is their competitive edge, what is the path to success, and it might not be IPO, it might not be acquisition, and so therefore it has to be like profitability, and that changes the dynamics, right? Because you're not in a growth at all costs era anymore, and that's, I mean, of course, not to mention the fact that money is more expensive today than it was before, right? Like
Yeah,
low interest
yeah,
rates also fueled a lot of this FOMO era.
yeah, I agree. One final item I want to lean into a bit more. It's very prescient because I was talking with another French entrepreneur and founder that runs a team of about 60, and like a tip, very standard SaaS business, and he is very focused on profitable, long-term, sustainable growth. And it was interesting hearing his perspective of himself as a French entrepreneur, where he's like, look, I want to plan for the future. I want my company to be able to run for the next decade without having to need additional funding. And so he was prioritizing slow, more methodical growth over top line growth at all costs. And he was sort of positioning his narrative as a bit of a contrast to the plight of many like VC backed like SaaS and AI companies right now. I'm wondering if you can tell me about, yeah, with your team being partly in France and then the US, how you think about your competitive advantage given like your personal background, as opposed to, just like a US founder.
Yeah, I think that's where it's essentially you build companies slightly differently, and I do hear a bit of myself in that description. I mean, when we raised our Series A, which was in late 2022, what was interesting was that companies were really struggling to raise money at the time, because kind of 2021 people were just like raising on the idea that we would have infinite growth forever. And in 2022, people were looking at a little bit more of the fundamentals of the business, like what was your burn multiple, like did you have a business that was sustainable, and that was a competitive edge for us because we had built something in a way that we were showing growth, but in a controlled and sustainable manner, and something that in 2021, when we did a little bit of fundraising, people were telling us you're not aggressive enough. You should spend a ton more money on marketing. Well, then in 2022, people were telling us, oh my God, like this like great strategy to not overspend and to be very diligent about where you're spending every single acquisition dollar. So I think it's at the end of the day, and I think this is like very true in this era where things are changing dramatically. It's important to understand what are the things that make you different, and to really lean into that rather than try and be a copycat or just like take some kind of a playbook and try and apply it. I think that just won't work, and we're seeing it, right? A company like Clay is having pretty massive success with VCs, and they've built a marketing model that is very different from what other companies we've seen, and now we're seeing that there's a SEO collapse for HubSpot, and that was kind of part of their moat, right? Like they had built this like organic traffic machine over the years, and now we're seeing that's falling off a cliff. So if you kind of take the playbook of someone else and try to apply it without thinking about like what really resonates with you, it is just going to be incredibly hard, because there's a pretty large likelihood that the thing that made it work for someone else is no longer going to be there to support your growth, just because the market is changing at an incredible pace. And so, yeah, I think that's a critical one. And I'll say like whatever you can do to align your strength with a competitive edge, it is going to work tremendously. Again, like we being able to hire in different geographies and being able to understand the nuances of different cultures has been incredible for us, because we've hired just talent that is well beyond what I've seen in the US, not only at a fraction of the cost, but also we are giving them an opportunity that few people give them. And so that's a competitive edge. Like we are willing to go look for these people when nobody will even look at them, because they don't fit like the typical Ivy League profile.
Right.
And so that's a competitive edge that will stay for a long time. It's a moat that's really durable, at least for the next few years. And it is something I would encourage everyone to think about.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great like ending point, because that's the thesis I sort of have built
Mm-hmm.
my entire recruitment endeavor around. So that's very, very top of mind for me. Francis, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate your time and insights. Before we go, what's the best way for potential future employees or people that are interested in following along with MadKudu? Like, where should they track what you guys are up to?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a good place to follow us, and if they want to apply, they can reach out to Ruben Hernandez at MadKudu. He's our head recruiter based in Mexico, and he's awesome. So in any case, it's always a good conversation with him.
Great. Excellent. Francis, thanks so much. Thanks, everyone. Miles Hischier signing off. And once again, if you are interested in accessing global talent, please drop me a note, hirewithmiles.com. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. Have a good one.